Welcome back to session 6. And the good news is, oh,
you're halfway there.
We're killing it.
Whoa!
Guys, we're halfway there.
We are. You guys are doing it. You're doing it.
We've got this. We can almost see the finish line already. And maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking about the previous weeks and some of the things that you've already overcome, and that's awesome. But I'm telling you, the healing is just starting.
That's right.
And we're going to get into even more opportunities to overcome trauma right now.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
On a chilly evening, a group of veterans came together around a campfire. Each one of us had a pen and paper ready to write down things that we had lost because of our military service. Some wrote the names of friends who had died on the battlefield, while others wrote about the different kinds of losses, such as the end of a marriage or the loss of physical abilities we once had.
Wow.
One by one, we took turns sharing what we had written and then tossed the papers into the fire. It was our way of letting go, of releasing the pain we'd carried inside. The flames flickered as the scraps turned into ashes, as if the smoke were carrying our burdens away.
Wow.
In that moment, a sense of relief filled the air. We found solace in sharing our experiences with one another. The campfire became a symbol of healing, a place where we could find support and understanding. Together, we let go of the past and embraced our futures with renewed strength. Now, we can't guarantee that this session will bring that kind of healing. Furthermore, we would never try to minimize or oversimplify the pain caused by loss.
Right.
Rather, our goal for this session is to offer you some fresh perspectives on grief that we hope will encourage you in spite of all that you've lost. Let's get started. Loss is something we all go through. It's a part of being human. But no matter how many times it happens, it never gets any easier. Loss doesn't pick and choose who it affects, and no matter how much we protest, it can't be undone. The intense feeling associated with loss is called grief. Grief is what happens when our vision for the future changes suddenly without our permission. It takes what it takes, and it never issues refunds. Loss is dumped in our laps. We can't trade it in or give it away. We have to carry it. And boy, is it a heavy burden to carry.
Yeah.
What makes loss even more infuriating is that it brings up so many questions without giving us many answers.
Wow.
We rarely understand why a loss had to happen or why it had to happen to certain people at even certain times.
Yeah.
These unanswered questions just make our grief feel even heavier. Many people have attempted to create a grief diagram illustrating the steps needed to process our loss. They usually look like the image in your field guide of a valley with the stages of grief neatly labeled:
Right.
shock, denial, fear, loneliness, and so on.
Yep.
But if you ask anyone who has experienced significant loss, they'll be the first ones to tell you that grief is rarely so neat and tidy.
Yeah.
Instead, they'll say that the grief process looks a bit more like the second image, with chaotic jumps to and from every stage, more like a child's scribble than a logical progression.
Yep.
And it is this ambiguity and complexity that leads many of us to bypass the grieving and mourning process altogether.
Yeah.
It feels far easier to deny, cry, numb, and run than it does to embark on a messy journey through loss. But when we bypass the process of grieving, we also bypass the goodness that is produced through it.
That's right.
At Reboot, we're going to run toward the complexity and difficult, rather than away from it. As you can imagine, it won't be easy, but just like those veterans around the campfire, we'll be doing it together. let's take a moment to share in 1 or 2 sentences what or who we've lost and how it has impacted our lives. And don't worry about sharing a lot of detail at this point.
Many of us never really learn healthy ways to handle grief. Instead, we may pick up unhealthy habits from those around us. We often observe how others react to difficult experiences, assuming they have figured out the best way to handle loss due to their age and experiences. But what if they haven't? What if they struggle with grief just like we do and unintentionally pass on unhelpful coping mechanisms? For example, one unproductive response we may have learned is called the replacement response. Imagine you're just 8 years old and your beloved family dog passes away. This furry companion held a special place in your heart, serving as one of your closest friends. Instead of encouraging you to face those challenging emotions, well-meaning parents might have tried to alleviate your sadness by saying, "Don't be too upset. We'll get you a new dog." Take a moment to reflect on this response. Do you notice how it actually avoids the importance of grieving?
Wow, that's really good.
Rather than recognizing and honoring the loss of your beloved dog, the combination of "don't be too upset" and "we'll get you a new dog" sends the message that you shouldn't feel sad and that you can easily move on by replacing your pet. In other words, here's something new. Now get over it. This learned response often extends beyond our childhood and permeates our adult lives, affecting our relationships and careers. When a romantic relationship ends and our hearts are shattered, we're often encouraged to seek a rebound relationship as a distraction, sidestepping the necessary process of truly facing the loss. Similarly, in our military careers, we hurriedly rush from a challenging deployment into another, never taking the time to process our losses before moving on. Or as we prepare for a transition out of the military, even before we remove the uniform for the final time, people bombard us with assurances that happiness and fulfillment await in the next job. They tell us you'll be fine once you find something new to keep you occupied. Too often, however, we find ourselves trapped in new roles that leave us unhappy and unsatisfied. Does any of this resonate with you and your story? If so, here's a question for you to consider. What if the purpose of grief isn't simply to get over it, but to grow through it?
Wow.
That was so good, Jose. Let's say that again. What if grief isn't a feeling to avoid, but rather a friend to embrace? What if grief presents us with an opportunity to share all the unexpressed love and appreciation we hold in our hearts after experiencing loss? What if it's a chance for us to navigate the depths of our emotions, honor what was lost, and gradually transform the pain into personal growth and resilience? How would this new perspective change the way you thought about what you've lost? How would it change the way you thought about and talked about the loss you shared earlier? Let's pause to discuss this for a moment. If we still believe that grief is a problem that needs to be solved rather than a process to be embraced, then we may not have much more to offer you during this session. But if we can all agree that the goal of grief isn't simply to get over it, then we can talk about the next step in the process of growing through grief.
That's right.
If the first step is changing the way we think about grief, then the second step is to articulate the significance of what we've lost. We can't downplay or deny its significance by saying, "Oh, it's just that I don't really trust people like I used to," or "I just try not to think about it." Remember that healing requires honesty. We must acknowledge and express how much it meant to us. Expressing the magnitude of our loss is how grieving turns to mourning. Think of it like this. How we feel about our loss is called grief, and how we express those feelings is called mourning. Both are required to move forward. How would you describe the feelings you felt as a result of the loss you've experienced? If you struggle to find the words, perhaps refer to the list of feeling words found in your field guide. Let me share a story with you to help illustrate what we're talking about. On January 24th, 1848, just before the Mexican War ended, something big happened. James W. Marshall, a skilled carpenter and handyman, saw shiny yellow pieces of mineral near a sawmill he was building. And that marked the beginning of the California gold rush. In just a few months, the population of California skyrocketed from 14,000 to over 100,000 people. Everyone was racing to find the precious gold hidden in those mountains. But sadly, for most of them, it turned out to be a wild goose chase. By 1860, the exciting gold rush era had faded away, and many miners were left even poorer than when they first arrived. It's a sad fact that even James Marshall, the one who discovered the first specks of gold, died without a penny to his name. Whether they wanted to admit to it or not, the miners' lives were consumed by the endless pursuit of a discovery that probably would never come.
Loss propels us into a similar search. After a painful experience of loss, our minds can become singularly focused on the slight chance of finding those hard-to-locate answers to our suffering. We think maybe today is the day that it will start to make sense, and I'll finally know the answer to the most elusive question of my hurting soul. Why? Why did he have to be the one who was killed? Why did God take that away from me? Why would God let us suffer like this? These are good questions to ask, but not if we get stuck waiting for the answers.
Wow.
Once we've changed the way we think about grief and clearly articulated the significance of what we have lost, the third step is to ask how questions alongside our why questions. For instance, how can I discover moments of joy despite the changes in my career? Or how can I lead that life that honors the memory of the person I have lost?
Wow.
The friendships formed during military service are incredibly strong, perhaps some of the strongest bonds one can have. Many of you would agree without hesitation that you would be willing to give up your life for your friends. But here's a question. If you're willing to die for them, are you willing to live for them?
Yeah.
If they were sitting here in the room with you right now and saw your life, what advice would they give you? What would they say? How can you live a life that honors their legacy? Do you see how these kinds of how questions are helpful because they actually have answers?
Yeah.
And as we receive answers, our confidence grows, assuring us that we won't remain trapped in grief indefinitely. This season of sadness will eventually pass. Just like the veterans sharing stories around the campfire, we must all find a way to release the past and embrace the future. Burning scraps of paper worked for them, but it might not be the right method for everyone. Let's pause for another moment and see if we can come up with some how questions that, when asked, could provide a path for us to grow through grief. It may even be helpful to consider what someone we lost might say to us if they were sitting here now.
Unlike the miner's search for gold, our search for answers isn't a fool's errand. Even if we don't find all the answers, the search itself helps us find a vocabulary for what we're feeling. And it gives us time to process, as we talked about at the very beginning, our new reality. A reality where something or someone we loved is gone and isn't coming back. But also a reality where God meets us in our grief. In one of the sessions, Brian shared how God didn't pull people from the fire, he joined them in it. The same is true when it comes to our grief.
Sure.
The shortest verse in the Bible is John 11, verse 35, which simply says this: Jesus wept. This verse, it's so important, not solely because it's the shortest verse in the Bible, but because it shows us something deeply profound about the character of God. The context of that verse, let me unpack it a little bit, is that Lazarus, a close friend of Jesus, has died. Jesus arrives at the home of Mary and Martha, two of his close friends, and he finds them weeping. But they're not just sad. They're also understandably angry at Jesus. After all, they had seen him heal the sick. They'd heard about him turning water into wine. They believed that he was, in fact, who he said he was, which was the Son of God. And yet Jesus hadn't come fast enough to keep his own friend Lazarus from dying. They felt like Jesus had betrayed their trust and abandoned them when they needed him the most. Jesus asks them to take him to the room where Lazarus has been laid. It's at this moment where, surrounded by others who are also grieving for Lazarus, that we see Jesus weep. I want you to put yourself in that room right now among the crowd. You see Lazarus laying over there. You see Mary and Martha, and you look over and you see Jesus, the Son of God, the one who has defeated death itself and who will one day wipe every tear from every eye, and you see him weeping. What do you suppose goes through your mind at that moment? To see a man with the power to do anything he could possibly want to do, crying with you. Jesus wasn't just shedding tears of sadness. The text in its original language gives us a picture of him in anger and deep pain. He wasn't just weeping with them, he was protesting the injustice of death itself right alongside of them. You see, death wasn't part of the original world that God had created for us to live in. He wanted us to be whole, wanting for nothing. He never meant for us to feel the deep ache of loss, the agonizing breathlessness of having the wind knocked out of us, the jarring silence of a song cut short. One day, Jesus will wipe away every tear from our eyes. There will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain, for the old order of things will have passed away. With power and grace, Jesus will make everything new. But until then, we find ourselves in a season of waiting, yearning, and growing for the restoration of all that has been lost, for a future that is not yet here. However, we are not alone. And in your season of waiting, you are not alone.
That's right. As we conclude, let's reflect on your loss once again. Give it a name. Was it a person, a relationship, an ability, a dream, a mindset, or perhaps a vision of the future that's no longer attainable? Write it down in the provided space. We're going to pause and give you a moment to let you do so. Now consider when you experienced this loss. Did it happen in a single moment or gradually over time? Write that down as well. If you're comfortable, take a moment to close your eyes and imagine Jesus right there beside you during that painful loss. He's present with you as you grieve. He's not distant. He's not detached. No, he's weeping with you, sharing in your sorrow. Imagine him saying, I cry over what you cry over. I hate what you had to endure with this loss or any loss at all. But I am not as distant as I may feel right now. In reality, I am right by your side, walking with you through every step of this journey. I'm here to listen and provide comfort. This process of grieving is not a problem to be fixed, but a gift I have given you to aid in your healing. I know how heavy this burden is, so I will carry it with you. Growing after grief begins when we change the way we think about grief. It continues when we find the courage to articulate the significance of what we have lost. Then, over time, we discover how we can move forward after our loss. Perhaps you will find answers to your why questions this side of heaven. Perhaps you won't. Mary and Martha were sad, hurt, and focused on the why questions. They wanted to know why Jesus hadn't come to save Lazarus. But in that moment, Jesus didn't want them to focus on the why. He wanted them to focus on the who. And the who was himself. He held the answers and was with them, just like he's with you.